Okay, it's supposed to let everyone know that we're recording.
Is there people there? Or who are the people?
Where?
You said we're supposed to let them know. Who's them?
I'm reading the instructions on the Teams. It says you're recording now. Please let everyone know. So that's just you and me.
Okay.
Yeah.
You look a little bit different, I guess, since the last time I've seen you.
Maybe I got a haircut. I let my son cut my hair.
You got a Palestinian haircut.
Yeah. He's also into it. So I started, he just likes his haircut like every other week. So I just started cutting his hair myself. And he's like, can I cut your hair? And I'm like, I guess so. He did pretty good.
How old's your son now? How old's your son?
He's 10.
Oh, the same age as Mariam. All right, let's go, my man. So listen, I got to make a decision today, and I really want your opinion.
Sure.
I need to buy tickets to whether we come this summer or not. And by the way, tickets are expensive as shit. It's $7,000 because apparently, for all four of us, as opposed to 4,000 last year. And apparently, I thought they would be cheaper with the war, but apparently, no. Apparently, like a lot more people are sidestepping Ben Gurion Airport and going to other airports like Jordan and so on. And I can't explain why the prices are so high. I was expecting it to be cheap. But in any case, do you think what is your take? Do you think we'd be safe come June?
What do you mean safe? I don't understand all the politics about you getting in through the airport and all that, the bureaucracy.
No, forget the politics. Forget that. I'm talking about safe in terms of the country.
Yeah, I feel pretty safe. It depends where you're going, I guess. I haven't really much left Jerusalem. So
is Jerusalem normal? Like, is it?
Yeah, there was a terrorist attack that happened like a month ago, but that can happen.
Is traffic normal? Is it busy like usually, congested, or no? How is it? Are people working?
These days, yeah, it's pretty much like it always has been. There was a few weeks when the traffic was actually lighter because a lot of stuff was closed and people didn't know what was going on. But most things are going. A certain percentage of the population are fighting the war, but that's relatively small relative to the overall amount of people.
So you're saying they kind of got used to it. Okay, let's get started because I actually have to do some work today. So yeah, let's go.
Okay. So do you wanted to bring up how you feel about this war and how this affects the Israel-Palestine conflict and politics?
Well, look, thank you for having me, Rafi. So, obviously now we're going through a war. It's not the first. It probably wouldn't be the last, although I hope it would be the last. I have seen so many discussions over the last 3 months where, between those who support Palestine and those who support Israel, where those who support Israel basically start with October 7, saying how horrible this is, and, wanting to hear from Palestinians or those who support the Palestinian cause to say, hey, we condemn this is bad, and so on. And usually there's some resistance from our side to saying this or to coming out, and the reason I think there's a mismatch, I guess, a lack of understanding is just we see this as having started long before October 7, and so I'm hoping that from this something good can come out. Obviously it's a catastrophe. Now you have 1,200 or 1,400 Israelis dead, now 24,000 Palestinians dead. It's going to be hard to bounce back from this. But the reality is, look, you cannot seriously have expected for life to resume the way it was before October 7 and for no response to come from the Palestinians. My message to the Israelis, and sometimes I think, I don't know, either they don't know or they pretend they don't know. I don't know what it is. But Israel, through its military, through its police, through its bureaucracies, they torment the Palestinians on a daily basis. And I sometimes I think, I've said that in the past to Israelis, and they say, "How do we torment you? We don't torment you." And the life of Palestinians, whether it's in the West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, it is miserable. It is, we can't plan anything in our day. We cannot plan something simple. Let's say, hey, I want to go from Bethlehem to Jerusalem or Bethlehem to Ramallah. Something that should take 30 minutes, an hour, could take hours. And it's a miserable situation to be in a country where you have no rights. You're not a citizen. You're not a resident. And you feel this is your country. Palestinians feel this is their country. And so, and I think Israelis or Jews, have just gotten comfortable, thinking, okay, we can keep the status quo the way it is, not find a solution for these people, thinking we can go around and maybe make peace with their neighbors, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Bahrain, whatever it may be, and just kind of by making peace with those other countries, that somehow this will put pressure on the Palestinians to accept whatever crumbs we'll give them. And my message to many Jews is that if you really want peace, it will not come through the Arabs. I assure you, it will not come through the Arabs. The way for long-term peace will only come through the Palestinians. It's not going to come through the Saudis. It's not going to come through the Emiratis. At the end of the day, the Saudis, the Emiratis, they entered into at least peace talks. They entered into peace talks for strategic reasons, and not a genuine type of situation. In the end, they don't care about us. We are the ones who have to live. And so now I'll put that aside, and I'll go back, more than 70 years ago, before Israel was created, there were several movements among Palestinians, or several leaders among Palestinians who told Jews that at the time, before Israel was created, there's no way this will work unless we share this land. They had, there were individuals who said that. They said that in the late 1930s. Sure. They said that in the early 1940s. And one person you'd be surprised that even suggested this before he completely went the other way, someone that's reviled in Israel, is Amin Husseini. Before he completely, joined German and all that stuff, he at one point said, look, if you really want to work this out, it has to be one country. It has to be one state. We have to live together as equals. The early Zionists, based on everything I read, didn't want that. They wanted an exclusive Jewish state or a supermajority Jewish state. And maybe it's understandable why they thought they needed that. Maybe having come out of Europe, where, they've always lived under other people, where they were always subject to the mercy of other people, they felt they just didn't want to be in a situation where they're not absolute majority, where it's not an absolute Jewish state. Okay, I'd like to have a Lamborghini. I'd like to have a Corvette, and I certainly would love to have a Ferrari. But I can't. I have to think of my kids, right? We can't always have what we want. I may like to have Palestine with only Palestinians, but I realize that's not practical. So what is the next best thing? What is the next best thing for me as a Palestinian who believes I am native to this land, who believes I am native to the land of Israel-Palestine? What would really cause me to accept Jews, Yehuda, Rafi, as the true neighbor and finally settle our dispute once and for all? I tell you what it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be a two-state solution. It wouldn't be, even if they gave us the entire West Bank or Gaza, I can assure you I would not be satisfied. Because to us, Palestine is not the West Bank and Gaza. Palestine includes all of Israel. So this is not a bad term. You shouldn't look at this as something negative. This is actually just informative. I'm not saying that when I tell you I am attached to every square inch of the land known as Palestine and Israel, I'm just telling you how I feel. I'm not telling you I want to exclude you. I'm telling you I want the right to live anywhere I want in that land. I have super attachment to that land. To me, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, Khalil or Hebron, these are all Haifa, Jaffa, even Tel Aviv that we know as Tel Rabia. We have strong attachments to it. When I go to Jaffa or Tel Aviv, I don't feel like I'm going to some foreign city. I feel like I'm going to Palestine. So again, I don't say that to scare you or to make you think that I want to exclude you. To the contrary, I genuinely would love to be in a state where my co-country people or my fellow country people are Jews or Israelis, where we actually live together and work toward making this place a better place. So, I'm giving you a general explanation of what would make me satisfied. And so the question is how we do it. Now, I just explained to you that to me, I would never be satisfied until I have equal rights from the river to the sea. I know these are bad words out there, but really, that's what will truly satisfy me, for me to finally say, all right, that's it. No more wars. I'm done. So, and I also recognize, saying that just like I have attachments to every city inside Israel, I also understand that Jews have attachments to the place that's supposed to be Palestine, the West Bank, for example, even Gaza that you refer to as Gaza. I realize, Jews have attachments to Al-Khalil or Hebron. I realize you have even attachments to Bethlehem. Isn't that where King David was born?
That's correct. That's the story. And so
so the point is, all these places are important to us. In Bethlehem, before they put the walls, that's where Rachel's tomb is.
Yeah.
That's where Rachel is buried. Every square inch of this land has something really important. There's a town right next to Bethlehem. It is called Al-Khadr, for example. I don't know if you know it, but Al-Khadr, right next to Bethlehem. So that's actually named after a prophet. The Christians know him as Saint George. Muslims know him as Al-Khadr. And he, based on our tradition, we believe he was a companion of Prophet Moses for a while. So every place in this area is holy, all right? And we have attachments to it. So now the question, if I'm telling you that the only way I will accept coexistence with you is if we have equal rights, if we have equal rights from the river to the sea, and if we share this land, the question is, how do we do this? How do we do this where we both feel safe? Now, obviously, now we've had 70 years or more of war. And there's probably zero trust among our people. And so obviously the system that has to be created cannot be based on trust. It has to be based on a system that even if you don't trust each other, it still works out. To me, the obviously simple reason is we just have one state where we're all equal. But I realize, some people, Jews, even Palestinians to a lesser degree, it's important to have that state that they call either Israel or Palestine. Well, we can have all that. And this is where the idea of a federation come in. We can have the idea of two states, but not two states as in two countries. Two states may be a better way of looking at it as two provinces. two provinces within the same country where each province basically makes all its own rules. Its own rules. And the best example in the world that I've seen is the United States. We have our states, we have 50 of them in this country. Every state is a sovereign in many ways. Everything within the state, they have general police powers, meaning they can make any rule for the general welfare of the people, subject to few limitations. Limitations is, for example, the state of Texas or Virginia or New York cannot say, we don't want blacks to live here, or men have to be superior to women, or that we choose Christianity over other religions. So there's some basic things that we cannot do, some fundamental rights that every citizen of this country must have that a state cannot violate it. And so with the exception of these fundamental rights, every state makes its own rules. So in theory, you can have your Jewish state where you can make all the rules that apply to you. And in Palestine, we can make all the rules that apply to us that affect our daily life, but we're still one country. If a Jew wants to leave Tel Aviv and go live in Bethlehem, he will have the right to do that without any question. He'll just go pack his bag, he'll go rent a place, he'll go buy a place, and vice versa with Palestinians. And, and obviously the basic foundation of a state like this is that every Jew and every Palestinian anywhere in the world will have the right to move to this place if they can afford it. So we're talking about basically sharing the country. And if you want to ask yourself, if I want a law, if I want to pass a law, will something like this work or not? Ask yourself, does this law that applies to me as a Jew, does it apply equally to Yasser or Kamal or Muhammad the same exact way? If the answer is yes, if it applies to Kamal the same exact way, then chances are it's going to work. If I'm choosing a system where, whether it's out of protection or just out of preference or advantage, I give myself extra rules or extra benefits, it's probably not going to work. And the best way is to look at your own kids. Imagine giving one to one kid that you don't give to the other, and see how the kids respond to you. They'll immediately think it's unfair. And it's the same thing in adulthood. We are two people who have suffered a lot in the last 100 years. And I think if there's anything we can take from this conflict that happened in October 7, is that no matter what you throw at the Palestinians, they're not going away. They're not gonna go away. They're very attached to this land, because this is not, Palestinians don't see themselves as just coming from this land like any other country. We have half our population, they trace their heritage to some prophet. I mean, even my own family, it's not that big of a deal in our society because, everyone is like that. But I'll give you a little history of my own family. We come from Ain Karim. The reason Ain Karim is important religiously for Muslims and Christians for that matter is because it was settled by Prophet Zechariah. Not the Prophet Zechariah of the Old Testament, Prophet Zechariah of the New Testament, who was married to Elizabeth. Elizabeth was the aunt of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Prophet Zechariah was the father of John the Baptist. In Arabic, among Muslims they call him Yahya, Prophet Yahya. Among Christians they call him John the Baptist. So they are the ones who settled in Ain Karim. And everyone from this town, just to give you an idea, everyone from this town who lived there before Salah ad-Din or before Saladin is necessarily a descendant of Prophet Zechariah. And my own family, even though we're Muslims, our family's name, we actually trace our heritage our ancestry to Prophet Zechariah. It's been passed down from family to family. You can still see our family name written on a church, when we were Christian, in the 3rd century. There's a church called St. Nicholas. It's in Jerusalem, the old city. My family name is on there. So you're talking about my family. And so the reason I'm sharing this story with you is it's not just me who feels this way. There are a lot of Palestinians who feel this way. A lot of the people who live in Hebrew, in Khalil or in Hebrew, the reason they're very passionate, they tend to be more religious than others. Many of those people think they're descendants of Prophet Abraham. Many of the people in Hebrew think they are descendants of Prophet Abraham, because Prophet Abraham was buried in Hebrew. He lived in Hebrew for a little while. So again, the point is, you got the town, as I mentioned, Al-Khadr near Bethlehem. People who lived there historically believe they're descendants of that prophet. So we're very attached to this place in a way most people don't understand. We're not going to give it up. There is no circumstance, there is no weapon, there is no gun that will get us to give up our attachment. What happened to us, what ended up happening, is we're proof of Darwin's theory of evolution, in the sense that all the ones who were weak, who couldn't handle the fighting, left, like my family, for example. And the ones that remained were the ones who could bear the pain more. And so you ended up with a lot more aggressive Palestinians than historically the norm. And I'll leave off with this. I do believe the answer is a one-state solution. We have to be one country and that we share. Whether it's a unitary one state or a federation, it doesn't matter to me. But that's the only question we should be asking ourselves, is the form of government. Not talk about the two-state solution, which really no one wants. So I look at it, both sides constantly blame each other. Why didn't the Oslo Accords work? Palestinians blame it on Israelis. Israelis blame it on Palestinians. I actually think this is a situation where it's not the fault of either one of them. They just couldn't separate. Separating or dividing the country was a difficult pill to swallow for both of them. Because Jews are attached to the West Bank, Palestinians are attached to Israel. It was a very difficult thing, and it's actually, we should thank God that it didn't work, because if we were to have separated, I think it would have been a short to medium run solution. It wouldn't have been a long-term solution. And here's how I'll finally end, and I'll shut up for at least 2 minutes. Look, among Palestinians, we have a history long before it became popular among Europeans and Westerners to live with other ethnicities. It was part of our DNA. Among the people who live in Palestine, we have Armenians, we have Greeks, we had Russians, we had Georgians, we have almost every ethnicity. We had Assyrians. But today they're all known as Palestinians. And there's a reason how this came about. Long before it became popular, and it really came from Islam, actually, because during Prophet Muhammad's time, he changed the definition of what it means to be an Arab. And he said that anyone who speaks Arabic is an Arab. And that's it. He basically was anti, racial identities or ethnic identities. He tried to push the idea that this is no good. And this idea was passed on to Palestinians, which is why when Omar ibn al-Khattab conquered Jerusalem in the 7th century, what is the first thing he did? One of the first things, when Omar ibn al-Khattab came to conquer Jerusalem from the Romans or the Byzantines, there were no Jews living there, or most of the Jews had been gone for at least 500 years. And when he went to what you call Temple Mount and we call the Noble Sanctuary, it was a trash dumpster at the time when the Muslims came in. It was used to dump trash there by the Christians of the day. And when he came in, and Omar ibn al-Khattab asked, well, where are the Jews? And the Christian leaders at the time said, well, we don't have any. We got rid of them a long time ago. And Omar ibn al-Khattab said, well, how could you have done that? And so he had ordered the Muslims to go find 80 Jewish families and bring them back to Jerusalem to settle. Same thing happened after the Crusaders came. When the Crusaders came, they kicked all the Jews out again. And then Saladin came and conquered Jerusalem. What did he do? One of the first things, he brought all the Jews back. And so we have a long history of actually recognizing that Jews have attachments to this land, that they have rights in this land. Now, you got to put aside the rhetoric that you hear from people fighting when we say, oh, no, you're not legitimate, you're whatever that word is, Khazars or whatever. Yeah, that's all people just fighting and angry and want to hurt each other. But in reality, remember, Palestinians are Muslims and Christians. And in the monotheistic religions, people tend to believe what came before them, but not what came after them. That's why both Christians and Muslims recognize Judaism as a godly religion with a godly scripture, but Jews don't believe in Christians or Muslims. That makes common sense because we came after you. Similarly, we believe Christians are legitimate religion, legitimate godly people with a book from God, but they don't believe that we are a legitimate religion. That's perfectly normal. But my point, the point is here is the majority of Palestinians are Muslims. 30% of original Palestinians are Christian, and we both recognize that Judaism is a godly religion. The Torah is God's book, and Christians call it the Old Testament. We call it the Torah. And unlike the division between Christians and Jews, where Christians believe that the Old Testament or the Torah is no longer valid, that it was replaced by the Old Testament, Muslims don't actually believe that. The Quran tells us that the Torah is still good law, that the Quran is 1/3 of our book, and that it wasn't abrogated, that the Torah was not abrogated except where we made things a little bit easier for you. And there's only a couple of changes we made, and mostly it's dietary laws. That's the only thing. That's why we both don't eat pork, but we will eat certain fish like shrimp or whatever, and you don't. That's one of the things that was made easier for us. So, but overall, Islam and the Quran did not abrogate the Torah. We consider, so in the Quran, and I really don't like talking about religion, but I only mention this to give you the foundation of beliefs of people who live there. In the Quran, they refer constantly to God's book. Now, a lot of people who read that, they think that God is talking about the Quran, but it's not. To us, God's book is made up of four sections introduced. You got the Torah, the Psalms, the New Testament, and the Quran. All that, we call it our book. It's not, we don't say it as the Quran. The Torah is part of the Muslim book. Why do I mention that? Now, I'm not very religious, but the reason I mention that is I'm telling you, there's a foundation, a religious foundation for me accepting you in Palestine.
Sure.
And that's why I honestly believe that a one-state solution will work. And I leave off with this, and I promise this is the last part. I'm not giving you this because it's my opinion. I'm giving you this, it's because it has actually proven to work. Let's look at how Israel divides Palestinians. You got those who are considered Arab Israelis, we call them Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. You got those who are in Jerusalem, who are residents of Israel, but not citizens. You got the West Bank, who is neither citizens nor residents. And you got the people of Gaza, who are neither citizens nor residents and are completely locked in. The best coexistence between Jews and Palestinians is not coincidental with the Arab Israelis, the ones who have the most rights among Palestinians. How else would you explain that, other than the Druze, who are Palestinian also, other than the Druze, how else would you explain that there are Palestinian Israelis who voluntarily join the military? Why do they? Why do people from Abu Ghosh join the military? Why do people from the Galilee join the military? Not everyone does, but some do.
Yeah.
A lot of the police officers you see in the old city are actually Palestinians. Why? Why are they joining while the ones in Gaza are throwing rockets at you? The ones in Nazareth are not even throwing rocks at you. What is the difference? They're the same people. In fact, 80% of the people of Gaza are from Israel. And so, what's the difference? Could it be that there's a relationship between the rights that you give people and how those people respond to the state? I think so. I think that's what it is. And if you really want a future for your children that's secure, and you don't want to be kicked out of this place a third time, you don't want to you don't want to keep fighting until the other side gets stronger than you. You want to be able to survive even if you don't have a military. There's only one way to do that, and that's to live as equals with me. Remember, there were millions or hundreds of thousands of Jews living in the Arab country before the 20th century. They didn't leave or were kicked out until the problem started between Israel and the Palestinians. You were more successful in Arab countries than anywhere else. And so I leave off with that.
Okay, thank you, Kamal. You've said a lot of stuff. It's a lot of things to respond to. I would say, as a Jew in the early Zionist period, there was not all the Jews wanted to have a state. That was sort of political Zionism. There was a variety of movements. One of the movements was called cultural Zionism, that wanted to create, rebuild the Jewish cultural center in Palestine, and also, cooperate with Jewish cultural institutions abroad, and try to preserve Jewish culture in the face of threats and assimilation. And there were movements among them called like Brit Shalom, which was a movement towards like a shared Jewish Arab state. And there was a early political party called Ichud, which was like Ittihad, which is like to form a union with the Palestinians. So there have been movements towards by Israelis and by Jews this time towards living with equality. You brought up Haj Amin al-Hussein. I know there was early negotiations where Haj Amin al-Hussein was willing to have equality with the Jews as long as the Jews were a minority, and there was some early conflicts there. But ultimately, he sort of instigated a major massacre against the Jewish population in Hebron and Safed and in Jerusalem, and that was one of the tipping points where the Zionist move. That was like the 9/11 of the early Zionists, where like they had this massacre, and they didn't even massacre most of the Zionist population living in the kibbutzim. They had massacred the pre-existing Jewish populations, the religious populations in Hebron and in Jerusalem and in Safed. And this sort of caused a shift towards where, if you look at early statements of the Zionists, you never hear like public statements of Zionists saying it's us versus them, we've got to push the Arabs out. Whereas if you see the rhetoric afterwards, it got much more harsh. And also the ultra-Orthodox Jews that originally opposed the Zionists decided like, well, we hate the secular Zionists, but they're not as bad as the Arabs. We're more upset at the Arabs. So they sort of unified with the Zionist movement. So there was it wasn't exactly that all the Jews came in to try to dominate the Arabs. This was a process of two sides developing this conflict. And you mentioned the Arab Israelis. I would say one of the main factors is what's called trust. It's like the reason people will say, how could you trust living with the Palestinians? Like, would you not have a wall between me and Gaza? And I would say, yeah, of course. Like, the what would protect me against the people in Gaza is them not wanting to kill me. Like, the same reason I live in Jerusalem, which has the largest Palestinian population in Palestine outside of Gaza City, right? The city with the most Palestinians in historic Palestine. And I should be scared out of my mind, but I'm not. And people would say, well, it's because the Jews have guns. And I'm like, no, there's Arabs who have guns too. There's Arab police officers. It's not. It's what is protecting me from the Arab neighbors who could knock on my door right now. Like 360,000 Palestinians live in the same city and can just come here anytime they want. What's protecting me from them is the trust, is our positive experiences. Every time I go to a doctor, I have an Arab doctor, or you have an Arab electrician, or you see them at the grocery store, you friends, coworkers, you build up this level of trust. And I trust that they also have built up this level of trust. I know that they know me. And whereas the Palestinians in Gaza, they've never met Jewish Israelis. They don't have any positive experiences with us other than bombing them. And I don't have any positive experiences with the Palestinians in Gaza. So Israelis, they say, no, the Arab Israelis are different because we live with them and we trust them. And so there would have to be a process of building that level of trust. It's a cycle of moving from like a hot war to like a cold war where there's like a standoff to building what's called warm peace, where people actually know each other and trust each other. Because it mentioned what things were like shortly before the conflict. There was a huge movement against amongst Israelis against the government. They were very much protesting the direction that the Netanyahu administration was going. I mean, I would protest the Netanyahu administration for 15 years of not trying to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and all sorts of disasters that has brought upon us. But they were upset that they were, moving towards what they would say is, changing the selection process for Supreme Court judges in favor of the coalition, and they don't have term limits and various powers of that they were taking too much power, essentially. So there was a whole protest movement against that, and the country was sort of falling apart. And then you hear out of nowhere that Saudi Arabia and the U.S. and Israel are talking about normalizing relations, and meanwhile the economy is getting worse and worse because of this protest movement and stuff, investments going down. And all of a sudden, there's like this specter of hope of this normalization deal, which would like the normalization with the Emiratis, or has a chance to boost the Israeli economy. But I'm like, you see Mohammed bin Salman saying, well, we're not really going to do it unless there's some improvement on the Palestinian track. And I'm like, there's no way Bibi's going to make a real improvement on the Palestinian track. I'm like, what are they talking about? But every day they're saying we're getting closer. Even Mohammed bin Salman is saying that. And then all of a sudden it blew up in our face, and we had this war because it was too contradictory. The idea. I had a lot of Palestinian friends, mostly in the West Bank, saying, "You guys should realize something's about to happen." Like, they would tell me they thought that the Palestinian street would just rise up and overthrow the PA and then turn their guns on Israel. They were like, the people are furious at you. It's not a joke. It's not it's not the PA. The PA is what's holding them back from going after you. It's the people. The regular people, they want to go to war. I mean, that's what the polling has shown. Like, we had this 5-year agreement to make some kind of progress in Oslo. At the end of 5 years was 2000, when I was here in school in the old city. And then it blew up in our faces, and there was the Intifada, the second Intifada, with buses blowing up everywhere, because it just never materialized. And since then, nothing. We've had no progress. So me, obviously, I agree with you. I'm in favor of some kind of federal solution, a confederation, I think, more. But I think you need to get moving towards trust and towards a peaceful solution. And you have to popularize this vision. That's why I agree. The vision of separating into two states with a hard border, I think, is unrealistic. My opinion is, like, while on one hand, emotionally and culturally and religiously, we're all attached to to both sides. I say, legally and politically, there really are two states here. There's the state of Israel and the state of Palestine, and the majority of countries in the world recognize those two states. Now, the state of Israel is occupying, one of those states is occupying militarily the second state, and has illegally put like 720,000 civilians there, which is in violation of what most people consider international law. Or, under Obama, the UN Security Council ruled that it was illegal for any settlement activity, and they demanded that they stop doing all settlement activity. And basically, they have these civilians that are there illegally. Israelis are not really so keen to pull out 720,000 civilians out of Palestine. So you're going to need, I think, some kind of agreement for, like, based on the two-state solution, but with open borders, with an agreement to leave the Jewish settlers that are there. Obviously, we're going to have to compromise on Palestinians who want to be able to move to Israel, and most likely you're going to have a sharing of Jerusalem, because there's a city of almost 1 million people. Nobody in Jerusalem really wants a physical barrier. The people in the Palestinian neighborhoods believe that their neighborhoods are in Palestine. I believe my neighborhood's in Israel. The people, my neighbors would say we're in Israel. So you have a city where different neighborhoods believe they're in different countries, but nobody actually wants to put a physical wall here. And you have, if all the Palestinians couldn't get to West Jerusalem, there would be no construction workers, doctors couldn't get to work, the dentist would shut down, like the city would stop functioning. So you can't like physically separate the two populations here. Anyways, I'm about to go to a grocery store. All the clerks in the grocery store are Palestinian. What am I going to do? The store will be closed if all the Palestinians can't go to work. So, so you're going to need probably to share Jerusalem. You have to figure out some agreement on the old city area. I would say consider it like a shared neutral area. And then, so all these stages, in my vision of a union, I think of it's more of like a confederation, like the early United States, where you'd have these states that I'd have an Israeli passport and a Palestinian would have a Palestinian passport, and we would have like a shared union citizenship that would entitle me to move to the other state. And then over time, as people got more comfortable, you could reduce to a single citizenship, sort of like it would become like a full-fledged federation, sort of like the early United States started as a confederation. Each state had their own sort of military, and they had a lot more autonomy, and the confederal government was very limited. And then over time, more and more powers were transferred, and it became and as trust was built in the federal institutions, you created the Federation of the United States of America. So that's sort of how I see the process. I don't know how much time you have. I have like a little PowerPoint I could show you explaining like details of my plan. If you got time to look, I could show you a few slides. Let me know when you get bored of it. All right, you're seeing my slides. So this is my plan. We called it Jerusalem Union. I was originally calling it, like, I've had several different names, but everyone was saying the name Israel and the name Palestine people find triggering. So we're like, the name Jerusalem is something that's somewhat neutral. And we named this movement Eretz Ard, which is Eretz is land. Eretz is land in Hebrew, and Ard is land in Arabic. And the idea was like we're a movement of Jews and Palestinians in favor of recognizing each other as fellow natives. That was sort of the name. So the state would be based on the Green Line, based on the 67 borders, with minor adjustments along the lines of previous negotiations. And then the Jerusalem area would be like a federal capital district, expanded federal capital, sort of like what you had described. And I also had the idea of creating electoral districts in order to balance the, how you would vote for the federal parliament. But there's sort of an imbalance that Israel has like 20% Arab, and Palestine currently there's no Jewish Palestinians, and most likely Israel and Palestine would make some minor adjustments to the border, and Palestine would have something like a 5% Jewish population, not as big as the Arab population. So the idea was to create an equal number of electoral districts, Jewish majority electoral districts and Palestinian Arab majority electoral districts, regardless of which side of the Green Line you were on. So we sort of divided it in like this map, where you'd have three major Arab Palestinian electoral districts in Israel, and then all these like small areas where the settlements would be like the Palestinian, the Jewish district. Now the map I made is in a final negotiated border. It's just sort of illustrate the concept. Right, so you have 11 Jewish majority districts, 11 Palestinian Arab majority districts, and one Jewish majority district in Palestine, and then a shared capital. That was sort of the model. So the partition would be based on a two-state solution, based on the 67 lines with minor adjustments. In my map, Palestine ended up with a little more than 22.5%. They ended up with 23.5. We gave them a little bit of territory off of Gaza for them to build an airport and an industrial zone. We also made these like small federal territories. One by the old city of Jerusalem, one by the old city of Hebron, and one off the border of Gaza and Israel, and one by the border of the West Bank and Israel, sort of a special economic zone to encourage investment and build up like high-tech parks and industrial parks with low taxes to encourage business cooperation. So the Jerusalem area would be divided into these regions. I call them boroughs. So I have like 4 Jewish majority boroughs, or 4 Israeli majority boroughs, and 4 Palestinian boroughs in Jerusalem. And the old city would be like the Holy Basin mixed borough. And so like the district council, sort of like the municipality of Jerusalem, would have an even number of representatives from all 9 sub districts, sort of like New York, where you have boroughs. But you would have half of them would be Israeli majority and half would be Palestinian. Sort of balance the idea of like my Palestinian neighbors want to say their neighborhoods are in Palestine, and we want to say our neighborhoods are in Israel, but nobody really wants to divide the city. So it's sort of shared and divided at the same time. So that's why I thought the borough concept, and you end up with like a Greater Jerusalem federal district. It's got like 1.275 million people, which is a little bigger than the 980,000 current. It's about 3 times the size of current municipal Jerusalem, and would have no checkpoints or barriers. My whole proposal is you don't have any. There's no physical barriers or checkpoints in the country and internally. This would be the demographics. It would be it's like 56% Jewish to 43% Arab, which currently the municipality of Jerusalem is like 60% Jewish and 40% Arab. So it's a little more closer to 50-50. It's about 1% others, which is like Armenians and other non-Arab Christians. And you could categorize them as Palestinians if you want. That's debatable. In Hebron, you'd have a similar, what's now called H2. You could make that sort of a federal district. And it would also be managed by a federal authority, and there'd be like a federal police force managing Hebron. So in the state of Israel would have 13 districts. 3 of them would be Palestinian Arab majority districts on about 14.5% of the territory of the state of Israel. The largest one would be up in Nazareth in the north, Nazareth, Akko, and all this would be an Arab majority district. It's about 70% Arab up here. This is about 80% Arab. This is like the seam line, it's called, sort of the border of the Green Line after the war of 1948. Jordan and Israel traded territories a little bit so that they would have a little wider of a midsection there for Israel. So you ended up with a bunch of Palestinians on the Israeli side. This was after the war was over, so nobody got kicked out. So you ended up with a whole population of Palestinians. About 360,000 Palestinians live around there. And then in the south, you have this whole Bedouin district where it's about 200,000 Bedouins. And so, I mean, there's no barrier. It's not like these are Bantustans. They're just like, states in America or something, or like sub-districts of the state of Israel. And then so the Arab population of Israel, you'd have like 38% of them would be in the Nazareth district, about 18% in the Al-Fahim, and the 11 in the Rahat district. And the rest of the Palestinian Arab population of Israel would be in the remaining Jewish districts. So the Jewish districts would be sort of more Jewish, and the Arab districts would be more Arab, and they'd have some level of local autonomy in each district. I'm going the wrong way. And this is the state of Palestine. We similarly have 9 districts. And all the Jewish areas together we would call one district, even though they would have like sub-districts, and they would be divided. It's also on 14.5% of the territory of the state of Palestine. And these areas are a total of like 80% Jewish overall. So there are still Arabs that live in the Jewish majority districts, and there's some Jews that live in the Arab majority districts. It's not like a 100% separation, but it creates some areas with semi-autonomy within the state of Palestine. And then in each state, the state of Israel and Palestine would also have a bicameral parliament where you'd have, like senators based on an even number of senators from each district. And then you'd have House of Representatives from the districts, but based on population. You would divide up however many number of congressmen you have or House representatives, and they would be distributed for the districts, right? You have like divided Gaza into 2, and Hebron, the Bethlehem area, sort of the greater Ramallah district, the Nablus district, the Jenin district, and the Tulkarem district. And then so this is where what would happen to the Israelis over the Green Line. About almost 70% of them would end up in Israel with these sort of minor border adjustments, mainly around Jerusalem area. About 26% of them would end up in the Judean Samaria district, the sort of the settler district within Palestine. And the remaining 4% of them, about 30,000 Jewish Israelis, would end up living like in Hebron or in the other Palestinian districts of Palestine. And then so total, it would sort of look like this. You'd have 11 Jewish majority districts, like the 1 in Palestine and then the 10 in Israel. You'd have 11 Palestinian majority districts, so 8 in Palestine and 3 in Israel. and you'd have each district would have its own constitution and its own local government of some to some level. You'd have a local district police force. The idea was to be set up to have a 50-50 federal parliament, at least on the upper house, more or less. And you could do redistricting if possible, but I think it's very unlikely that you would need to. The federal government would be a bicameral parliament, like the United States. So you'd have an even number of senators from each district. I suggest something like 3. You'd have the government would be what's called like a federal council, sort of like they have in Switzerland, which is like the chief ministers, and they rotate which one of them becomes the prime minister for the year. But and which one is the prime minister is elected by the parliament, sort of like what you were saying. But technically, the head of state is this council and not a single individual for the federal government. You'd have a common market. You have a single currency. It could be the Israel-Palestine shekel, and you'd have federal authorities over infrastructure and all sorts of resources, a federal Supreme Court. It would deal with economics, joint infrastructure, environmental, diplomacy, security, education. That would be responsibilities. You have a Bill of Rights of the federal government. I agree with you. The federal government needs to be secular. I think the state governments are going to have, like they do now, the state of Israel. Most things are secular, but like marriage, burial, and divorce are handled under various religious authorities. And so I assume that the state of Israel example will probably be similar to how it is now. And if you wanted to get a secular marriage, you could go through, they could have an institution of the federal government could set up a marriage courts for people who don't want to have a religious marriage. For example, also the idea of collective rights for various minority groups, ultra-Orthodox Jews, Christian Palestinians, Druze, different groups can have some kind of council that's recognized under the various governments to preserve their culture, right? Like I was saying, like ultra-Orthodox Jews, they have the right to preserve their language, the right to education in their own culture, traditions and symbols, access to holy sites, and so forth. Immigration and citizenship. So you'd have state citizenship and union citizenship. At the beginning, you would say like all the Jews who end up in the state of Palestine would have the option to also get a Palestinian citizenship, and in exchange, we'd have an even number of Palestinian refugees could move right to Israel and get an Israeli passport and a Palestinian passport at the beginning, and everyone else would get their own state citizenship and a common union passport. So as a union citizen, you could move to Tel Aviv if you wanted to. I could move to Ramallah, and I would vote in the federal government as if I lived in Ramallah. I'd vote for the local, municipality, but for the state government, I would still vote in Israel, unless I went and got a Palestinian passport, and Palestine could decide how many years I had to live there to get a passport, and etc. And that would probably be how it would go for the first several years of this until people were comfortable. And I was suggesting something like for the first few years, you'd have like 100,000 Palestinians per year and 100,000 Jews can make Aliyah each year, and then after a certain number, you can maybe reduce to 70,000 per year. And once you move here, then after a certain number of years, you get your federal passport or your union passport, and you have the right to move to the other state. And so this is sort of the demographics of Israel-Palestine. It used to be that Palestinians would have way more kids than Jews, but these days it's almost about the same. This is sort of the estimate of population based on the scheme of immigration I proposed. You start with almost about 7 million of each. Israel is like 7.7. There's 7.7 million Jews and 7.2 million Palestinians. Depends how you categorize everyone, and you'll end up with something like 26 million people after 20 years, and it'll be about half Jewish, half Palestinian. And this is what it would look like. It'd be roughly 50%, 50-50. You'd have 1.1% other people, and I mean like Armenians and non-Arab Christians and other sort of small minorities, Baha'is and Samaritans. This is the state of Israel itself. Would something look like this? It would still be about 80% Jewish by sort of calculation. About 18% of the population would be citizens, and you'd have a certain percentages that would likely be Palestinians who would live here as residents. And at that point, and maybe 20 years down the line, they could say, this is stupid having 2 passports. Why don't we just have 1 passport? And then it'll be a pretty easy transition to like a full federal state. This is the state of Palestine, would also probably be about 95% Palestinian, have a small Jewish population, and maybe even smaller number of Jewish residents who would live there. The economy, you can see that the more Palestinians move to work in Israel, the less unemployment after 2000, when the Intifada hit, you have higher unemployment in Palestine and less Palestinians working in Israel. So there's a company called Human Capital Index. So the Israelis are slightly higher than the average sort of Western European country, and the Palestinians are actually better than the average, like, poor country. Palestinians are like the only other country with the highest, as high of what's called a human capital index, like how high the education and health is for Palestinians, was Saudi Arabia. So they outperform all the rest of the Arab world. They're more like Romania or Hungary, or like an Eastern European country. So they should be a lot wealthier than they are, mainly because of the conflict. This is what it looks like now. Like, Israel has one of the highest GDP per capita in the world. It's higher than France and higher than many Western European countries. And Palestine is like, Jamaica or something. It's 15 times poorer. And that's sort of that. It shouldn't be that way. And you could do something like a renewed 5-year implementation plan. Oh, wait, where was I? Okay, so security. So there'd be state, district, and union police forces. So each state would have its own police. You'd have a federal police that would be sort of one of the primary institutions. And my vision of the military is you basically take the IDF and make it the military of the Federation. And in several phases. In phase 1, Israel would basically pay rent to Palestine to maintain bases in the West Bank under agreement they're not going to harass Palestinians. They have to have like cameras if they interact with Palestinians, and they're basically there for protecting the country as a whole and not for attacking Palestinians. And that Palestinian would have like an observer status. The second phase, that Palestine starts paying for the military, and Palestinians start to join the military, and the union sort of has oversight and the IDF. And in the third phase, it just becomes the army of the Federation, like the Israel-Palestine Defense Force. And my thoughts is that to get to the second phase, we need to have a peace agreement with Lebanon and Syria and maybe Saudi Arabia, so we could say, like, we're not at war with any of our neighbors, and then we feel a little more comfortable to move to the next phase and start recruiting Palestinians. The third phase, once we have sort of peace with like Iran and like the broader Middle East, then we just move towards having a single military, and because we're not really at war with our neighbors, Muslims and other people in the region. And you could start with something like a 5-year implementation plan where Israel agrees to no new settlements. We have an agreement on Area C. We'll say, okay, this is how many houses we need for Palestinians and how many houses we need for Jews. And we'll have a signed agreement each year on how many things we're going to build as we go through this process. We have an agreement on the IDF presence, like the Palestinians agree they're not going to start attacking Israeli soldiers. Like they're there by agreement, and we're going to sort of phase that out. Where we start making a list of what territories are agreed on, like any part of Area C that's going to Palestine, we can start transferring that over to Palestine. Things that are supposed to go to Israel in the agreement, we can start transferring that to Israel. Places that are still up for grabs, we'll have a short list of things that we're still debating over. But instead of having a map that looks like, Israel's holding 60% of the West Bank, you can reduce that to like the last 5 or 10% that we're still arguing over. It minimizes the things that we're still debating over and reduces the amount of tension over it. It doesn't look like Israel's occupying all of Palestine. We're just there's a few, where's Gush Etzion? Is it going to be on the Israeli side, or are we going to put it in the, right. And then, right, that was that. Reconciliation. So Palestinians apologized for 1929, the massacres of Hebron and Safed and Jerusalem. Israel's apologized for 1948 for evicting all the Palestinians. There's compensation. And we would try, as for the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews that got kicked out of the Arab countries, as we make peace with those various Arab countries, we should demand that they give compensation. Like my wife's family was kicked out of Iraq, or they fled Iraq. They weren't allowed to take any of their property and their houses. So either you could give them back their property and then they could sell it on the market in Iraq and make some money, distribute amongst the relatives, or they could just give us, if they've already sold it to somebody, they could give some kind of fair compensation. Similarly to Palestinians, obviously, you compensation for lost property. My opinion is, in any place where the property is in a municipality now in Israel and it's not occupied, then give it back to the Palestinian who owns it. That's simple. If someone else is living there, then or using it, then you can pay them some kind of compensation. I think as part of the deal, Israel should rebuild a symbolic number of those destroyed villages from 1948, and we'll take a poll of the number of Palestinians that moved to Israel, like which ones they want to rebuild, and we can invest and make those nice. And so if they're in those places, you could give them those properties back. And in places where it's in the middle of nowhere now and it's in a forest preserve, you should just give them compensation. It's not necessarily we're going to rebuild every village from 40 years ago, and then they could use that money to buy in neighborhoods that exist now. Right. the right of return will be based on, this is sort of what I said, have a refugee settlement board, sort of a 5-year proposed plan to empty out all the refugee camps and disband UNRWA. You could have like a stage progression of resettling all the Palestinians. There's about 750,000 Palestinians outside of the Union that are in refugee camps now. So you could have within this program, that's enough people that we would absorb over the first several years, over the first 5 years, and you would have to find them new homes and compensation and phase out the UNRWA camps. You could get a coalition of supporting states for Palestinians who are interested maybe in moving to the United States or getting or Australia or the UK, or get them an option if they want to go to somewhere to get an education, and then maybe in the future they can move to back to Palestine, which would also help because you have a large number of people with very little like education that are very much in poverty. So if we move all these people all at once to Israel-Palestine, we're going to be stuck like taking care of. They'll be sort of like in refugee camps here. So if some people could help. Some of them, a percentage of them move to the U.S. and a percentage moves to the Australia, they could help sort of rehabilitate them, get them an education, and then they could come back here less needy. That's obviously in our economic interest, but obviously they should have that choice. If they want it, I'd say first, the top priority is those Palestinians in refugee camps, and then, Palestinians without citizenship abroad, and then obviously everyone else who wants to come. And reconciliation we talked about, and then mutual recognition of historic connection. We both recognize that Jews and Palestinians are native to the land, and they're, according to the tradition, we're descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, who were both two brothers that lived in Hebron, who buried their father at the tomb of the patriarchs here. And I think that's it. In the Golan Heights, at least in my vision, Israel, the Union would try to purchase it from Syria for, it's worth like $50 billion in property, in cost, and in exchange also allow those mostly Druze and a little bit of Circassians who were kicked out in '67, let them come back and move to the Golan. And the Druze tend to get along with the Israelis anyways. And it's better for defensive purposes, and also you can go skiing there, and there's certain you grow apples. So at least the Israelis would be happy. And then the long-term trajectory is you make like a federal republic. After you build up this thing, you transfer the army into the army of the Federation. You've gotten over the hump of integrating all these refugees in refugee camps and dismantled the refugee camps. And then we have a sort of steady stream of immigrants and not just like a flood going on. Then you create like a formal federal republic. You get rid of this 3-passport system and move to a single passport. And then you can make something like, I would say, like the Middle Eastern Union, like Europe out of the Middle East. And Jerusalem would be the capital, like Brussels. It'll be sort of a lot like Belgium, right? Where you have this country made out of 2 states. Essentially, they have like Flanders and Wallonia, a French area and a Dutch-speaking area. And then they have a shared capital region in Brussels. And that's also the capital of the European Union. So similarly, Jerusalem would be the capital of the greater Middle East, and you would have like open borders from here to Morocco, and that's sort of the long term vision, and that's it. That's my vision of what should look like in Israel-Palestine.
Well, I mean, thank you. I really do appreciate that, and that gives me some optimism listening to that. I mean, if you noticed, you were referring to details. You said that's kind of like what you have in mind, Kamal, even though I didn't mention it here, and I purposely didn't mention it. You were referring to what I have written down that you have read. I purposely didn't talk as much detail as I usually do. I wouldn't argue details with you because I think, to me, anyone who has a general idea of a shared future is in the right direction. I don't presume that Rafi and Kamal can come up with a solution for everyone else. I mean, we're presenting the idea, hey, we want to live together. We want to live together. And, the details obviously would have to be bigger than Kamal and Rafi, right? There'd have to be a lot more people that agree on that. I do want to clarify a couple of things, and I know you didn't mean it otherwise, but, you mentioned Christians a couple of times. It's really important, for you to understand that we as Palestinians, we don't really separate between Muslims and Christians. I mean, we really see each other as one people in every way. And not just those who speak Arabic, including Armenians, Assyrians, Russians, Greeks. Once they've settled, that's it. Once they've laid Grant, we see them as Palestinians. They will always be Palestinians to us. And this is just part of our tradition. Now, obviously, in the 20th and 21st century, things may have deviated from that principle. But still, to me, the way I was raised, the way I see myself, our Christian population are like the jewels in our crown. And I see them there just as much as Palestinians. And I know you didn't mean otherwise, but I just want to clarify it.
Oh, sure.
For my Christian brothers and sisters who may have been listening to this. And look, your system is good. It's obviously well thought out. I prefer a little bit more simpler solution. I think, like, in terms of actual borders of the state, I don't envision physical borders. I do see administrative borders, like kind of like in the United States. When you go from, let's say, New Jersey to New York, there's no actual physical border.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But you do see the song.
I said we have no checkpoints. There's no.
Welcome
to Israel.
I know. I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you.
Palestine. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have borders for administrative purposes.
Sure.
I'd like a little bit simpler system. I realize the system you're creating is basically to make this work in a secure, trustworthy fashion, and I'm sure there are many ways to do that. I kind of look, in the past, I said, you know what, we can have our two states or two provinces, probably more accurate. We can use as a default position the 1967 line, and we can change it if we want to, based on some of the changes you made, based on demographics. We can do that, discuss that in the future. But really, for the long term, I realize, and you're right, you're absolutely right, Palestinians are no longer having kids like they used to. I think I read one report that Jews are actually having more kids these days. And I'm assuming that's probably more due to the Hasidic community having.
Yeah, the religious community has grown and grown. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so and so I would I realize for a lot of people that's a fear. They say, hey, many Jews don't realize that Palestinians are not having more kids than Jews, and they say, hey, what if you outnumber us one day? So to me, I came up with a system kind of like the U.S. Senate. We say, look, each side contributes 50% to the federal parliament forever, regardless of population. And the reason I chose 50% is because, look, any legislation, any law to pass, you need at least 50% plus one to vote. And if you have a nutbag, whether it's on the Palestinian side or the Jewish side, who wants to make some discriminatory law, any law for it to pass, you need at least one on the other side to vote with you. And if an Israeli or a Jew wants to pass a law that says, hey, Palestinians are second-class citizens in this country, well, no Palestinian is going to vote with him. And similarly, if a Palestinian wants to make a law that, hey, Jews have to be second-class citizens in this new country, no Jew is going to vote for him. And this is really why I came up with the idea of a 50-50 split. It kind of, in a situation like that, it really, almost by default, any law that passes is.
So how does the 50-50 work, though? So is it 50-50 from the state of Israel and the state of Palestine?
Yes.
Residents? So, but what if the state of Israel has more Palestinians in it than the state of Palestine?
It won't change. It's 50% Jews, 50% Palestinian.
50% Jews. So that's sort of what I did. I divided it up into electoral districts, not exact, and just made sure that there was an even number of electoral districts for each, for each collective ethnic group. And so
it's similar. I just simplified it as much as possible. I say 50% Jews, 50% Palestinians. The states can choose its electoral districts as it wants to, regardless of how they choose it. It's 50. They're not.
The federation is not from the state, because not everyone who lives in the state of Israel is Jewish. There's a lot of there's 20% of us are Palestinians.
I get that.
So those 20% of Palestinians are voting in the federal government for the Palestinian side.
They will be part of the 50% that's allocated to the Palestinians.
Okay, so that's basically what I did. And you're going to make it by like a Chad, like I click that I'm Israeli, I'm Jewish, or I click that I'm Palestinian. How do I pick which side I'm voting for?
Well, that's something, we figure out. I mean, but so we know at the end of the day, I mean, we can do like they do in the U.S. We can have gerrymandering, we can have specific districts, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, we agree that it will be no more than 50% Jewish, no more than 50% Christian. Now we can allocate,
Or Palestinian.
for Palestinian, we can allocate, who votes in which districts, but at the end result,
Yeah.
50-50.
That's
That's
exactly
what I
right.
had in mind.
That's exactly right.
But for state governments, now for state governments, let's say, you have 700,000 settlers living in Palestine, and I want them to stay. I don't want one settler to move. Under my plan, not one settler will move. And in
Sure.
fact, you can expand the settlement. So now for the federal government, they would be part of the 50% for the Jewish side, but
Right.
they can also run for election for state government for Palestine.
Absolutely.
They can
I
still, as
totally
Jews,
agree.
So I just want to simplify the process. And again, it's and in terms of the federal, the military, we have one federal military made up of Jews and Palestinians. And oh, you know what? I'm being buzzed. I actually have to go, so we're gonna have to pick this up some other time. I'm doing a TV interview now, and they're calling me right now. I didn't realize.
Okay, so sign off, and I'll try to save the recording.
All right, my friend.
Take care. Thank you. Okay, cool.
Yeah, sorry for the break there. When we left there for a second, we were talking about, or you were asking me questions based on my statement that I said I would like the federal parliament to be divided 50-50. And you were asking, well, what if there are Jews who live in Palestine or Palestinians who live in Israel? Does that impact the 50-50 split? And the answer is no. We have agreed that it's going to be 50% Jews and 50% Palestinian, and the idea behind in the federal parliament. Now, in terms of the state governments, we want to have a more democratic situation. Now, like I said, we have 800,000 or 700,000 Jews living in the West Bank. I think it's only it's best and more efficient for them to be able to vote in local Palestinian elections, to even join the local Palestinian parliament. I would have no problem with that whatsoever. I wouldn't want to, even if I was given the choice of having a 100% Palestinian province or a 100% Jewish province. I think that's kind of productive for the long term. We have to get used to living together as country people, as people of the same country. And so it's essential for me in the beginning that Jews, the Palestinians in Israel, they remain in Israel. The Jews in Palestine, they remain in Palestine. And similar goes with municipal elections. Municipalities, whoever lives in the municipality is part of the municipality, votes in the municipality. And just to make life as easy as possible, let's say, for example, we can take, like, say, settlements like Har Homa, for example, which was originally, Bethlehem land and now became part of Jerusalem. It's a Jewish settlement. Or let's say Ma'ali Adumim. Those will become their own municipalities, right? We want to give people as much of what they want as possible, to feel as comfortable as possible, to rule themselves as much as possible without interference from a wider state. If Jews want to live together in a city, where they can do what Jews do, that's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, we live as one country. We're one people at the end of the day, the way I see it, and that's how I want it. And I just, if there are other questions, and in terms of the military, I really think we would have one military. And I think also in the long term, we wouldn't have the same need for the military. Although I think I would want us to have a strong, united military. But I really believe that if you were to make peace with us, if we were to finally say, if we were to finally say, hey, this is it, we're satisfied, we're happy, you won't have problems with Iran. I'm absolutely convinced of it. You
For
won't have
sure.
problems with Syria, with anybody. It's over. They don't want problems. They want to move on. I mean, all the countries in the region, like Jordan or Syria, they realize that what has held them back economically, for example, was this conflict. I mean, Jordan is one of the biggest victims of it. Every time the economy starts going up, something happens and they go back to zero. Just right before this conflict began, they had unprecedented increases in tourism revenues, more than they've ever had before. The economy was finally beginning to go up after COVID and really brought them down. And right after this war happened, again, they were back to zero again. So they're impacted by this conflict in a way they don't want to. They're tired of it. They don't want to spend money on militaries. I mean, they talk about it all the time. You may not hear it, but they do, and we hear it among themselves. I have no doubt in my mind that the minute you make genuine peace with us, the head rabbi will be having dinner with Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran. And I think that's really best for you in the long term. I mean, even though you're much stronger than us at this point, Israelis are, I wouldn't want to be in the Israeli position. I really wouldn't. Because what kind of existence is that? That your basic for survival is to have a strong military and keep fighting all the time. What kind of existence is that? I mean, I don't know how old you are. I'm assuming you're in your 30s or 40s.
42.
42.
Okay.
All your life, you've had ups and downs regarding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's not going away. Everything you tried.
You're
I've
alive
read,
too, my friend.
exactly. I haven't spent a happy moment because of this situation, and I've read before. It was so funny. Right after the 1948 war, right after the 1967 war, right after the 1973 war, and so on, many Israelis or commentators said, "Oh, this is the war that ends all wars. It's finally over. We defeated them in 6 days." It didn't even last 1 year. Then you had a war of attrition with Egypt immediately after 1967. I mean, if Israelis don't see that no matter what they do to the Palestinians, this is not going to go away, I don't know what it would take to show you this. And I've heard Jews say, yes, we can handle this. We can withstand this level of attrition for a long time. Well, I wouldn't want that existence. As bad as I have it as a Palestinian, I would not want to be on the other side, because that's not a life I would want. It's not, because for us, I have zero now. I know it could only get better if I keep fighting, but I don't want to fight. That's the whole thing. I don't want to fight. I just want a normal life. I want to be able to have breakfast in Jerusalem and lunch in Amman. Just get in my car and go over there, and I can be there in a half an hour or an hour. I want that kind of, normal existence.
Yeah, I'd want to be able to get in a plane and go to Baghdad and go visit my wife's family. And come back, go do a roots tour and come back here, and that'd be very nice.
Exactly. I mean, so your basis for really remaining as strong as you are is really still based primarily on the United States. But I mean, can you really guarantee that support forever?
No, it's going to go bad. Israel, especially if you look at the younger generation of Americans, especially on the Democrat side, the pressure is going to go up and up and up on Israel. I think at some point they're going to be threatening Israel with sanctions over a building in the West Bank. They're going to say, you got to stop. I don't care right now. No building, zero, or we're going to, or something bad's going to happen. We're going to start threatening you with like they did to South Africa. I don't think they're going to force Israel and Palestine to become one country, because there's no real mechanism to do that. But they could say you can't build at all, like they did with Obama, but permanently, you have to negotiate from now, no building until it's done. and then Israel would be like, "Oh, we got to do something about this." But it'll take a while for it to get there. But I
You know,
think
there
that
was a poll. I don't know if you saw it. There was a poll that was recently done, and I think I posted it, where they did it between Americans between 20 to I think
I
30.
quoted that. I just wrote an article in Times of Israel. It was so long I had to rate it in two parts. So the second part had that I quoted that poll and I took a picture of it from I think the Washington Journal or something.
I mean, it's really
Yeah,
changing in the U.S. now. Not everyone sees it because it's generational. Still, you have the people in their 40s and above. They haven't really changed. They're still pro-Israel,
right.
maybe 80%. But you're talking about this new generation. It's completely different. I see it. I see it in the way they refer to me, the way they see me. I mean, they'll come to me as if I'm a rock star, and I'm serious. And I think if I was Israeli, I would want to make peace with the Palestinians while I am strong, before I have pressure on
Absolutely.
me. Because if you wait until someone has, like the US has a gun to your head or threatening you with sanctions, you may not get as good of a deal as you can today.
Absolutely. But also, I don't want to go through sanctions. I have a business here. I want the economy to go well. As far as I'm concerned, I think Israel, the one friend I need is the Palestinians. Israel, we also need the United States. I need two friends. I need Israel and I need the United States and Palestinians. Everyone else, I don't care. You want to be my friend, you don't want to be a friend, I'll be fine. But if we don't make friends with the Palestinians, it doesn't matter how many friends I have. I'm going to have problems
And it's
forever.
the same with us. I mean, our lives have become so intertwined, more intertwined than we are admitting to. I mean, look at now. The economy of the West Bank is devastated. Now the Palestinian Authority is actually afraid that there may be an uprising against the Palestinian Authority because Israel's not allowing any of the employees to go to their job. And you talk about
So
over
in
200.
Israel, it's a nightmare. And nothing's getting done here. We have no road construction. Our country is falling apart because we don't have any workers. It's a big
You
mess.
you you read that story? I mean, so I think Abbas told the U.S.
I see it
government,
in
look, huh?
I see it in
No,
the reality. We had so much construction over the year before this war, and now nothing. They were redoing all the roads in Jerusalem, and now there's like everything's sort of frozen. At least a lot of
but
the Palestinian workers.
you kind of also do this to yourself. So, for example, Israel knows. I don't know if you saw this. It's kind of funny. So Netanyahu knows that it's really dangerous to keep 200,000 Palestinians away from their jobs because it's devastating the Palestinian economy and it's devastating the Palestinian Authority. So what did he do? Rather than tell them, okay, come back to your jobs, he went to the UAE, asked them, hey, why don't you pay these people stipends? And did you read about that? And
Yeah, and you had like no.
yeah, no, why don't you ask Ukraine to pay for that? They said. And it was a joke. And actually Netanyahu wants them to go back to work. Even the defense, the Minister of Defense want them. It's Mordich who said, if you let them back in, I'll leave the government, which means the government will fall. I mean, so this is a
The far
joke.
right is threatening them, and then Bibi's in trouble. We have a fragile situation with our government. It's part of the problem, definitely, and that's how we got here. At least a large part of it, because
And I wonder
they
if
didn't really want to negotiate, and he didn't want to leave power. Bibi just keeps wanting to stay, and we don't have term limits here.
So what if you have elections tomorrow? Do you think there will be a shift, or it will still
For
go
sure,
hard?
no, Bibi would go away.
Forget Bibi, but it's not about Bibi. It's about whether it's the far right or you have a moderate
No,
government.
there's no far left. They're not even a centrist coalition would
Right.
show
That's
off. You
right.
would have the mainstream. You'd have Benny Gantz who wants to negotiate a deal with the Palestinians. I mean, which is good. Like that's taking us in the right direction. Obviously, we want to push our vision and stuff, which we got to do. I think this is a good time to start talking about this idea because that's how we get out of this situation of the war. I'd like to have a ceasefire, but like if I go back to Hamas, you know, building up weapons to go back to war with me, what have I gained? I'm just in a cycle of violence. And we need a vision of a way out of this, you know, where we have a future where we stop waiting for each other to build up a big enough military to go to war every time. Like that's
So I
that's
got
not
a
a future I want. I got kids. I don't want them to go. I want them to go to play soccer, not to go to learn how to kill each other. You know. And you have kids, right?
And so we want to go home, you know, this summer, and my daughter is telling me, please, Daddy, don't go there. Don't send us to a war where we can get killed. But I really want to go home. It's the only fun part of the year that I have is when I come home. I love this. I could go to France, I can go to Italy, but I really love this place. But my question for you is, so you're telling us how bad it is economically. So Smortage is the finance minister. Doesn't he know what Israel is going to?
He's a little crazy. He's on the far right, and he's seeing that he's going to lose power. So yeah, why doesn't he let them in? Because people are freaked out about the danger of letting in Palestinians during the war. Because he's like, well, if I let them in, we're going to have deaths in Israel. You know, other people are going to come in who are sympathetic to the war and going to attack Israelis. I mean, there's something to be said for that. I don't know, but I agree. You can't just keep all the workers out. It's a tough situation.
No pressure on him. I mean, the Minister of Defense wants him in. The Minister of Defense wants.
I mean, I don't know if it's all up to him. I assume that they will let them back in. I don't think that they're going to keep this up. You know, and I think things will probably calm down as the war gets into a phase. It's more going to be like Iraq was. Like after this is like the big, you know, when they went and invaded, and then it's just going to sort of simmer down where there's just like, you know, Israelis wandering around Gaza and trying to avoid getting blown up by IEDs. I mean, that's going to be the situation until they negotiate a next phase where they have somebody take over Gaza, like the Palestinian Authority or a new version of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, whatever they set up. You know,
if I was the Palestinian Authority and if I go there, this is what I would advise them. Don't do it. Don't take over, because the problem is the Palestinian Authority doesn't have any authority. I'll give you and this has been the problem from day one. I'll give you a perfect example. The city of Rawabi. The city of Rawabi, which is about 3 miles away from the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority. They've been begging for a road, to widen the road to go in the city now since they first opened. They don't even have authority to do that. When they were established as a city, they wanted water. They couldn't even do that. President Obama had to interfere. So what I'm saying is, unless the Palestinian Authority has actual authority to make people's lives better, to improve their economy, why the hell should they go in and take it? I mean, at the end of the day, people need jobs, people need to live, and if there's no trade, if there's no economy, everyone's going to blame them, just like they're being blamed now. You know, and
if they don't take over, I mean, maybe they need new elections. They need a new version.
But what good is it if we have elections? It's not about, even if we get the perfect president, what difference does it make if we don't have any authority? We don't have any jurisdiction.
Well, I mean, right. No, Israel needs to be pressured to make a deal with the Palestinians, and they have both pressure from multiple directions. They have pressure from the United States to do this. They have the situation in Gaza that they want to hand off to the Palestinian authorities. They have motivation to try to work with the PA to get this problem off their back. The Saudis, they really want to make a deal with the Saudis to be part of like the new economy in the Middle East. And, you know, so they have like a carrot, they have a stick, and so there is momentum to try to work something out with the Palestinian Authority. They're going to want to see some improvement at the PA, specifically in the issue of what's called pay for slay, where they were like giving money towards.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. So they were giving money to family. I mean, I wrote this in my article. They're not actually giving it to anybody new because they can't even afford it. But it's just because out of a sense of pride that they don't want to give it up, because then they look weak compared to Hamas. So, and the U.S. and Israel offered them more money for a welfare program. They said, restructure the welfare program so everyone who needs money gets money, including all the people who are getting it now. And they said, no, we can't do it because we'll look like sissies, you know? So if Hamas goes or like agrees to be part of like some kind of new coalition where they're not going to have a military running Gaza, shooting missiles at Israel, some kind of a negotiated arrangement so that something like the PA takes over that's agreed to work with Israel. I think Israel's going to have to, right? The PA is going to have to give on the pay for slay and restructure their welfare. They'll end up getting more money. The Israel would get a deal with Saudi Arabia, and Palestine would get a deal where they get more authority. Like, they get all full control of area A and B, and start transferring over parts of area C and move towards steps towards a two-state solution or a negotiated settlement. And then this is a good opportunity for people like us to say, listen, we could solve a lot of your other problems if you just why don't you let the settlers stay, and let's talk about how you want Palestinians to move to Israel and see what kind of terms we could negotiate for that. Because I don't want to take all these guys out of their houses. It doesn't bother me if a certain number of Palestinians want to move to Israel. Obviously, we're going to want to have open borders, a shared Jerusalem, a shared economy, and all integrated security. So like we got a lot of mutual interests and needs here to go resolve, and then put them down and figure out our policy going forward. That'd be much better than shooting missiles at each other.
No, I agree. I think to me right now the next step is to figure out how we're gonna publicize our vision of a one-state solution or a federation rather than a two-state solution. I really don't believe in a two-state solution. I just think it will not deliver what people think. It could only.
I found marketing it differently to the Israelis. I don't usually say it's not a two-state solution. I say it is a two-state solution, but it's better. It's a two-state solution with open borders and a shared capital. So there's still a state of Israel and there's still a state of Palestine. And we could have a shared Jerusalem, but no walls, no checkpoints, no soldiers walking around with machine guns. It's a much better. A better vision, because I think if you say one state, they're a little bit scared. If you go too much towards, because you're in a situation of like a hot war, you have literally people shooting missiles at each other. They're like, that seems like a lot. So like, you want to find a way to make them feel a little more comfortable. I mean, I wrote a proposal. My previous one was like dividing the whole country up into like cantons, sort of like Switzerland, and just have an even number of Jewish and Israeli canton and Palestinian cantons on the whole country. And it was like one state, it was like Switzerland, right? I found Palestinians love this idea. Israelis, it was hit or miss. I had some who were into it and some who were like, no, that's too scary. Because if you look at the portion of Israelis, about 50% or maybe a little more, depending on when they publish it, support the two-state solution. The largest group of Israelis who want a solution, that's what they think the solution is. There's a smaller percent, like maybe 20%, who are really open to like a one-state solution with equal rights for everybody. And then you have a bunch of people who are farther right than that, who want like apartheid or something. So you've got to convince the people who want apartheid that like we're going to do a version of the two-state solution where they still get what they want. And so you got to figure out how to wrap this and package this so it's not too scary, but like still gets you whatever you want. So I feel like, yeah.
But I think at this point, hopefully you can publish this and we can convince some people. But without a doubt, I genuinely believe the way forward is a shared future. I see it. I've seen it. Last time I was there, I went and had lunch in Abu Ghosh. And I've seen it, everywhere I went, restaurants, you see it's half Jews, half Palestinians, it just seems like everyone's getting along. I've also went to Jaffa, I've seen it actually in the old city. I've seen it when politics and inequality is not an issue. I see it. It can be done. Why are you and me?
In Israel proper, there's not really the conflict. The conflict is in the West Bank. And most Israelis, the majority of Israelis don't live in the West Bank, so they don't really know what's going on. They're like, what do you mean? We get along with the Arabs. I have Arabs, my Arabs are my neighbors. I have coworkers who are Arabs. What's the problem? They don't see that there's this occupation going on there because it's beyond a wall on the other side. And they're like, I don't know what's going on there. I know there's some violence and stuff, and people are shooting missiles at me. And so you've got to come to an agreement. We've got to push this vision of a future, and they need to hear from Palestinians also that they want to live with them as equals, and hear positive messages coming from Palestinians, and Palestinians need it from Israelis. Like you need to hear an Israeli who says, okay, I don't have a problem with you. I want to live with as an equal. I just want this conflict to end.
Yeah, and the other day I was talking to an Israeli, and he was telling me, every time he goes to Hadassah Hospital, like more than half the doctors are Palestinian. I don't know if that's true or not, But
Oh yeah, and there's universities there. In Jerusalem, like 40% of the population of Jerusalem are Palestinians. I live
so
with more
there
Palestinians
is
than anywhere else.
coexistence. There is coexistence, and even though they're not citizens of the state, which in my mind it's mind-boggling why Israel wouldn't automatically make the people of Jerusalem citizens. It's really mind-boggling. It just hurts them
Yeah.
when they do that. And but anyway, I just hope
They're allowed to, in theory, get it. Like, and supposedly they made it a little easier, but still, most Palestinians don't want to do it. I mean, I know a guy I work with who lives in Kfar Akum, and I said, "Why don't you get citizenship?" And he's like, "What's it going to do for me? I got all the same benefits, and I'm Palestinian. I don't know why. What's the motivation for me to actually bother?"
yeah,
I
but
knew
there
another coworker of mine who also lived there, but she also had American citizenship. So she said if she would get Israeli citizenship, they asked her to give up her U.S. passport. So she said she wouldn't do it. So which is not,
but that's the point.
Which is stupid because I didn't have to give up my American passport.
Exactly. That's
that's not
unequal
fair.
treatment. So the benefit of giving Israeli citizenship. So, for example, a Jew can go live in the West Bank in one of the settlements. He wouldn't lose his Israeli citizenship. A Jerusalem resident who goes to live in the West Bank for cheaper housing, he could lose his Jerusalem ID. So there is a difference. There is a difference.
Absolutely. That's why we need a union. You get a union citizenship and you never lose it. And you can live wherever you want,
Yeah,
and then,
that's the point. I really hope that whether it's you or someone else, and I've been saying this for years, but maybe I don't know how difficult it is, can run for the Knesset based on that platform. And it wouldn't matter if you won or not, just to win based on that platform. We have to figure out a way to publicize this idea of a shared future.
There's a party that I'm a member of, that started a Jewish Arab party that's calling for, more or less what we're about. So there are parties like that's starting, but you gotta figure out how to get this message to more people. I mean, I think it's about media. And what I've also seen is like you could probably convince most Israelis and Palestinians to agree to something like this with about 20 minutes of good marketing to them. You sit them down, you explain to them the situation. And you get a pretty high hit rate, but if you just polled people cold, it'd be very hard. You need there's a level of convincing that.
You just wrote this article, really long article. I mean, you talked about pay for slave to pay or whatever, but I was expecting you really just to focus on the idea of a shared future of a federation. I mean, to me,
there's a second part which is also talking about the situation. I mentioned at the end how to make that it will be like a federation, but it's sort of get there. And I wrote this article, and they talk about, and they wanted me to make it into 2 parts.
Yeah, but in order to get there, you have to read the manifesto. I'm saying that should have been your focus because that's really our main goal. I mean, the pay for slave things, I just don't see it as that significant. But and we don't.
Okay, let's see part 2. But I'm gonna try to start writing more and more.
Or maybe we can write a 1-page article. I mean, to me, I'm a strong believer of being concise.
You should get a column there. You could go. I'll help you. Open up a column in Times of Israel. You can start writing.
Why do you do that?
And then you just register. Write up. Sign up and stuff. Write who you are and a little bio. And if they agree, they probably would. Why not?
Well, show me how to do that. Show me how to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Gershon Baskin right there. A lot of people.
That would be awesome. Okay, so I got to get back to work to make some money. So we'll talk, my friend. Let's stay in touch.
Sounds good, man. Good luck making money, and hopefully we'll make some peace too.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.